this is one of my favorites. Thomas Jefferson was running for president of the United States. It's the summer of 1800. He's running against John Adams, the sitting president, and Jefferson at that point in time was the vice president, and he and Adams were not speaking. They hated each other at that point. And a friend of his, Benjamin Rush, he was a physician, and one of Jefferson's probably 10 closest friends in the world, who was also a deist and a Unitarian. He was not a Christian, Ben Rush. Sent him a letter and, asking Jefferson's thoughts on Christianity. Now, at the top of the Jefferson Memorial here in Washington, D.C., if you go into the Jefferson Memorial, there's this dome at the very top above this giant statue of Jefferson. And etched into the dome are the following words: I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. That's what it says in the Jefferson Memorial. And fundamentalist Christians love to quote that. Jefferson using the word God, the altar of God. Let me provide you with the context for this, because that quote came out of that letter to Ben Rush. Let me read you the entire letter, or at least 3 paragraphs out of the letter. There's some other personal stuff in there that doesn't have to do with this topic, but he says, Dear Dr. Rush, I promised you a letter on Christianity, which I have not forgotten. I do not know that it would reconcile the genus irritable vetum, which is the genus, the kind of variety of irritable vetum, angry priests, who are all in arms against me. Their hostility is on too interesting a ground to be softened. The delusion, and now he's talking about the First Amendment, right, which guarantees freedom of religion in the United States. The delusion on the clause of the Constitution, which, while it secured the freedom of the press, covered also the freedom of religion, has given to the clergy a very favorite hope of obtaining an establishment of a particular form of Christianity throughout the United States. And as every sect believes its own form the true one, everyone perhaps hoped for his own, but especially the Episcopalians and the Congregationalists. The returning good sense of our country, and by that he's speaking of his being elected president of the United States. Okay? This is in his letter to Ben Rush, by the way, he says, please do not let anybody read this letter. This was found in his papers after he died. The returning good sense of our country threatens abortion to their hopes. And the preachers believe that any portion of power confided to me, such as being elected president, will be exerted in opposition to their schemes. And they believe rightly. For I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. You get it? He's talking about religion. He said, but this is all they have to fear for me, and enough, too, in their opinion. End of quote. So the very quote that has been put into the Jefferson Memorial and is constantly quoted by these Bible thumpers about Jefferson, no, throne of God, eternal hostility against any form of tyranny over the mind of man. Well, the tyranny over the mind of man that Jefferson was speaking of was Christianity. And he was being peppered by, lobbied by, harassed by the Unitarians and the Congregationalists and, a whole bunch of other religious folks, basically wanting him to profess Christianity. He was not a Christian. He was a deist. And he went out of his way not only to not endorse Christianity, but basically to diss it on multiple occasions. And yet you've got these paid apologists for this new, muscular, business-friendly form of Christianity that was essentially invented in 1940 by the National Association of Manufacturers. And this one guy, this one pastor, who spoke at their conference and said, hey, it's time for business to bring in the Christian church. And thus, within a generation, we had Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and all these guys, and they started building empires. And much of their empires were a consequence of money that they were getting from the government. This was Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush's 1,000 Points of Light. the Reagan campaign and the Bush Sr. campaign had as their liaison with the fundamentalist Christian community a young man by the name of George W. Bush. And they were funneling tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps billions, but certainly hundreds of millions of dollars directly to these right-wing churches, who then were engaging in political activity to support the Republicans. So we're back to my original theory that there's three groups of people in the Republican Party. There's the rich people, there's the shills for the rich people, and now they have turned so many of these preachers into the shills, and there's the suckers that the shills bring along. It's amazing. It's astonishing.